Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we are officially 1 week away from the start of Eagles training camp at the NovaCare Complex right next to the Lincoln Financial Field. What are the biggest training camp roster battles for starting positions and for spots on the 53 that are going to be watched heavily throughout camp the next coming months? That's coming up right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Monday edition of the show. This podcast is brought to you today by betonline.net. They've got you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before because BetOnline is where the game starts. I'm Louis DiBiase. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Eagles on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well for 5 shows a week. We're back to daily podcasts each and every day as Eagles camp is right around the corner. This is the last week we have to go through without any activity across the NFL. Cannot wait to get training camp going, the preseason, and before you know it, the Eagles will be kicking off the season in Detroit against the Lions in a month now. I mean, that's going to completely fly by. I can't believe it's already July 18th. And with training camp right around the corner, I want to get into today battles on the Eagles 53-man roster. I should say, overall, the 90, cutting it down to 53. Who's going to grab those spots on the bubble? Who's going to win the starting jobs that are up for grabs on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball? And that one's a little more interesting because the Eagles starting positions, the majority of the 22 spots on both sides of the football, they're kind of locked up, right? Compared to recent years or, throughout the last 5 to 10 years, this year, there are way fewer spots available. I mean, most are locked up right now, right? I mean, at wide receiver, you know who the starting 3 are going to be. At running back, at tight end is obvious. The defensive line, cornerback 2, Bradberry, Slay, and Maddox. It's pretty set. I would say there are 3 positions that are really open for starting snaps in 2022. I want to get into those first and then getting into the battles for, the last roster bubble spots and then also like the primary backups because there are some primary backup positions also open. But, the biggest starting spots available, I think there's 2 on defense and there's 1 on offense for the Eagles. Starting off first, I think the first one you got to get into on offense is the right guard battle between Jack Driscoll and Isaac Seumalo. And this one's interesting. It goes back and forth. The other interesting part of these 3 starting battles is it could go one of 2 ways, one of 3 or 4 ways, depending on the position we're talking about. And all bets are off. I don't know if there's really a favorite at any of these spots. When it comes to right guard, there's pros and cons to both Seumalo and Driscoll. Seumalo is the longtime starter, drafted in the 3rd round in 2016 for the majority of those years outside of, Stefan Wisniewski in 2017. Seumalo was a starter along the interior of the offensive line. He's shown over recent years he can play at a very high level at the left guard spot when he was healthy. This team trusts him a lot. They value his chemistry next to Jason Kelce. So does Kelce, who got emotional last year after that game in Atlanta when Seumalo went down with that Liz Frank injury and he was lost for the season. Kelce called him maybe the most overlooked, underrated piece of that offensive line because Seumalo has been surrounded by all pros and Hall of Famers for the majority of his career. So there's a lot to like about Seumalo being that guy. I think they trust him and his versatility that he'll transition well going from left guard, where Landon Dickerson now has that spot completely locked up, to now right guard. It is a very different position, but Seumalo's played center in college. He's played tackle before for the Eagles when they needed help at that spot. So he's shown versatility in college and in the pros, and so they do value that a lot. So those are the pros with Seumalo. However, he is coming off that Liz Frank injury, which is a legitimate injury for an offensive lineman. He is playing at a new position, so although they trust that he can make the transition, there's no guarantee he's going to pick up off a injury and a position switch and play at the same high level he was before. And he also is a free agent next year. So you got to ask the question, do they prefer to go with Jack Driscoll, who could be the long-term starter that has the most upside long-term with this offensive line, and continue him to grow his chemistry with the other starters? So there's pros and cons to both. Jack Driscoll, he played really well, I think, down the stretch last year at this spot. So again, he's got the long-term potential, the future that could be his spot. So maybe just start that right now. He has the proven ability from last year. He did play really well. I think Honest NFL did a film breakdown of Driscoll about a month ago, and I was pretty impressed with what I saw. You never noticed right guard as a weakness when Driscoll was the majority starter at that spot. But Driscoll also, kind of like Seumalo, has had inconsistent health over the years. He's had his fair share of injury issues, lost to the season at the end last year with an injury. He also is one of your primary backup tackles. Driscoll's kind of one of your swing linemen, like Halapuli Vaitai in the past, where, and also Seumalo at times can play, all 5 positions, or, at least the majority of them at a certain floor. Driscoll has been your right tackle in practice when Lane Johnson wasn't there at OTAs. So this team does really value continuity on the offensive line. They don't like to mix and match different guys, Driscoll playing center, guard on the left and the right, and just have it always switching week in and week out. They want that continuity. So maybe with Jack Driscoll being a primary backup in multiple spots, if Lane Johnson were to go down, right, or of course, they do have Andre Dillard. You could kick Jordan Mailata over to right tackle, but there are going to be times that you want Driscoll at right tackle. So maybe you prefer to just keep Seumalo in at right guard, since if there were injuries, he's not going to go anywhere. He would stay in that spot where they might need Driscoll to play at other spots. So there's pros and cons to both guys. It's tough to say who's going to win this battle. If you asked me right now, I'd probably say Isaac Seumalo, but man, is that a 50-50 battle that I'm kind of cool with either outcome. Seumalo's still young enough too, where, he could earn a contract extension. So, I don't think it's like, oh, you have to start Driscoll. Seumalo's a rental player that's gone next year automatically. I don't think that's the case at all. They still have a couple years of contract control on Driscoll's rookie deal. So, it's up for grabs. This is one of the true starting battles in training camp next week for the Eagles. And that's really the only one on the offensive side of the football. One on defense I want to get into before a quick break is the safety position. And I think when you look at safety, unlike right guard, where Driscoll or Seumalo are going to win this job, and there's not going to be really a rotation there. When it comes to safety, they're all going to rotate. So this really isn't, there's not like a major role to win where you're a guy playing 90% of the snaps versus a guy that's, just in and out and is a clear, obvious backup. This is going to be safety by committee in 2022. But who does get the most snaps at safety, who gets featured the most in that rotation, that definitely can be determined through training camp, through the preseason, and then eventually your play in the regular season. It can definitely switch up. So you have Anthony Harris, you have Jaquiski Tartt, who was signed in June. You have Marcus Epps. And you can't forget about K'Von Wallace. K'Von Wallace has been injured every year. Really have not gotten to see him consistently on the field, see what he can do coming out of Clemson as a 4th-round pick. Showed a bunch of versatility there, high level of play. He maybe had the most physical upside and maybe still does, but it's really hard to rely on him. I think the real favorites to be a part of this rotation featured is Harris, Epps, and Tartt. And like Seumalo versus Driscoll, this could go one of 3 ways. I think everyone has their pros and cons. They have a good argument and a bad one in this battle. Anthony Harris, he's got the experience with the scheme, playing under Jonathan Gannon in both Minnesota and Philadelphia. He was a majority starter for you in a playoff 2021 season. He did get better down the stretch. I thought he was a complete non-factor the first half of the season, but as the playoff run got deeper and deeper into the regular season, as the season was winding down, he definitely did get a lot better. So Harris is probably the favorite right now to lead this defense in snaps at safety. But I think overall, Jaquiski Tartt has been the best player of these 3 over the last 3-4 seasons. I think he's the most athletic. I think he might be the most versatile right now, coming out of a great defense with the San Francisco 49ers. PFF had him as one of the most efficient safeties in coverage over the last 3 years since 2019. Only actually Rodney McLeod and Marcus May had better efficiency numbers through PFF in coverage at safety since 2019. So I would say overall, I'm rooting for Jaquiski Tartt to lead this team in snaps at safety. I would bet right now it's Anthony Harris. But then you've got Epps and Wallace. You've got the two younger guys that, the Eagles might be rooting for those two to give them a reason to not need Anthony Harris and Jaquiski Tartt, who are both, Tartt's already over 30 years old. Harris is at that point now too. They're both only on 1-year deals. I'm sure the Eagles would love Marcus Epps or K'Von Wallace or both to emerge as players that you can rely on heavily in the starting lineup because they're the guys that have the most long-term upside. Marcus Epps, I think he is a guy that could become that player for this team. I don't think he's going to be a star safety. We talked on Saturday about trading for Jesse Bates. I don't think Epps has that kind of ceiling, but there were a lot of times in 2021 where he was better than Anthony Harris and Rodney McLeod, where he was the Eagles' most efficient safety. So Epps, it is up for grabs. Epps can win this job and beat out Harris and Tartt to lead this team in snaps at safety. I think he took a legitimate step last year. But it is really hard to predict because Epps, again, though, we've never seen what he could do as a full-time majority starter that's featured in a way that other starting safeties are across the NFL. So, Epps also, outside of last year, he wasn't really anything to write home about that you'd want to force him into the lineup. And then again, there's K'Von Wallace, who I'm rooting for because I still think he has the most upside of all four of these players. I think he was the highest pick the Eagles made. So they've invested more in him than any of these guys. And I think his skill set is just as good. But he's got to shake the injury bug. He has not been able to show that he can play. He hasn't been, we don't know if he can play because he hasn't been available. So that's going to be an interesting battle to watch those four. I think all four of them are going to play a good amount this year unless they did trade for a Jesse Bates or they made another move at safety. But I think the Tartt move was their move at safety with Harris as well. And they're going to let those four battle it out in camp. Again, I would predict that Harris leads his team in snaps. I'm rooting personally for Jaquiski Tartt to be the top guy with either one of Marcus Epps or K'Von Wallace making the Eagles force them onto the field. There's one other starting battle I want to get into coming up next, and then we're going to get into as well depth battles across the offense and defense as training camp is just 1 week away. We're going to get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. But guys, first, a shout out to one of our sponsors of today's show, and it's the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs in sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news this year, including the MLB, where the Philadelphia Phillies head into the All-Star break in sole possession of the third wild card spot. The last time they had this record heading into an All-Star break, they won a World Series in 2008. The Phillies have been pitching well. They've been hitting dingers, home runs. Schwarber right now is just on one. Make sure you bet the over when the Phillies come back. Hit on them to cover. The Philadelphia Phillies are making baseball fun right now in the city of brotherly love. But it's not just the MLB. You can bet right now on boxing, on MMA, on golf. You've got some majors coming up as well in the PGA, and you've got LIV now too, which is really interesting. You can bet on all of that. Esports, find all your scores, betting odds, all that and more at betonline.net because they are where the game starts and where the game is going because you can also bet on futures in the NFL and the NBA. We thank so much for BetOnline sponsoring today's edition of Locked On Eagles. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles. We are kicking off our final week of shows before training camp starts next Tuesday, July 26th. And of course, that means we got to get into the training camp battles that are going to happen. When it comes to starters, there's not that many positions available. Right guard, Isaac Seumalo versus Jack Driscoll. You've also got as well the safety battle between Jaquiski Tartt, Anthony Harris, Marcus Epps, and K'Von Wallace. There's also some other battles that I want to get into when it comes to the depth of this roster, but we do have one starting position to get into as well on defense, and it's one of the off-ball linebacker spots. I think it's pretty safe to say that Kyzir White, the Eagles' new free agent signing from the Los Angeles Chargers, is going to be your every down linebacker that leads this team in off-ball linebacker snaps at the end of the year. And I'm not counting, Hassan Riddick. I think he's a pass rusher, and yes, is he going to play off the ball as a strong side Sam linebacker? Sure, in a way. And will there be times that he plays in space? Yeah, but he's a pass rusher that I consider to be grouped in more with the defensive linemen rather than the off-ball linebackers. Kazir White is going to be your featured guy here. And then there's another spot that's going to be heavily featured as well at linebacker. That's more up for grabs for sure. Kazir White's going to be one guy. And then the other battles between Nakobe Dean, the rookie third-round pick out of Georgia, TJ Edwards, who was the majority starter last year that had a career season, and a third-round pick in 2020 that has maybe as much upside as any linebacker on this roster that made significant strides last year. But like K'Von Wallace, another pick in that draft, has not been able to stay healthy and show that the Eagles can rely on him in the future. It's why they had to go out there and sign Kazir White and draft Nakobe Dean. It's Davian Taylor as well. Those three are going to battle it out to be the right-hand man for Kazir White in 2022. I think the majority of analysts and fans would agree Nakobe Dean is probably the guy that's just, he's going to win the job. I could see this team, and it's going to frustrate me maybe a little bit just because I think he has the lowest ceiling. I know TJ Edwards was really good last year. I really believe in the upside and the just vaster ability and skills that Nakobe Dean has compared to Edwards, and same too with Davian Taylor. I could see this team starting off the season with Edwards maybe being featured a little more than Dean and Taylor, but Nakobe Dean, I think, is going to force his way onto the football field. Him and Devin Lloyd were the two most talented linebackers in this recent draft class. He was a first-round talent that should have been a first-round pick, but it seems like phantom injury scares made this entire league let him drop to the Eagles in their lap in the third round, which is absolutely incredible. It seems like he's completely healthy. So I think this is going to be one of the steals of the draft. I think he's instantly going to be a leader vocally on this defense. His communication ability, you saw that at Georgia. His ability to get sideline to sideline, his just football IQ, his spatial awareness, his power and his tackling, his coverage ability. The Eagles are going to have no choice but to have Nakobe Dean be the every down linebacker. I think even when it's all said and done, he could be better than Kazir White by the end of this season. So this battle, I think it might start off with Edwards maybe winning it, but I don't even know. Like, again, I could see them in the season starting Edwards first, but if Nakobe Dean looks incredible in training camp and he's making plays in the preseason, and it's obvious that this defense gravitates towards him, we already saw how he plays behind Jordan Davis, so we know the chemistry there already, and the Eagles have big plans for Davis being kind of the heartbeat of this scheme for the future and maybe even for this year. I think Dean's going to force his way onto the field. But he definitely has TJ Edwards there. TJ Edwards is going to be on the football field this year. He took a big step last season. But again, I just think Edwards has the most limited skill set. I would even prefer, honestly, to have Davian Taylor be featured more in passing situations, blitzing as part of this rotation with White and Dean over Edwards. I don't think that's likely. I think it's likely Dean beats out Edwards eventually, whether it's through camp or a couple weeks, maybe a month into the regular season. Davian Taylor, though, definitely has the longest path, but he's got more physical upside as Edwards as well. And it wasn't just Edwards last year that turned around that linebacking play. Yeah, Eric Wilson was horrible. Alex Singleton was awful. Edwards brought stability and brought that play at the position to a higher level, but so too did Davian Taylor. The issue, again, is he has not been reliable with his injuries, and he still does have a ways to go in his development. So it's going to be fascinating to see this battle play out in training camp. I think right now, Nakobe Dean should be the favorite to win it. But again, don't be surprised if TJ Edwards definitely has a legitimate role. I think all of them are going to have a role, though, because there's going to be times in third and long that you want Davian Taylor to go after the quarterback, blitzing through the A-gap or off the edge or being in coverage, because, again, he has way more range than Edwards. But they're all going to have a role. I'd predict right now it is Kazir White and Nakobe Dean, though, featured the majority of the time in the regular season. Now, we got to move over to the depth battles. There are a good amount of depth battles in training camp to watch for the Eagles. One I'm really interested in on the offensive side of the football is the wide receiver position. We know the top four, it's locked up. It's going to be Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Quez Watkins as your three starters. Zach Pascal's going to rotate in there as well. And then I think there's two positions, two spots at receiver that five guys are going to battle for, the fifth and sixth spot. Jalen Reagor versus Greg Ward versus Britton Covey versus Devin Allen versus Deion Kane. Three rookies, all undrafted, and then you've got two guys that have been a big part of this offense, unfortunately, over the years with Jalen Reagor and Greg Ward. And you would say that Jalen Reagor. You would hope he'd be the best player in this group, right? A former first-round pick that's played way more than these other guys over the last 2 years. I mean, Covey, Allen, and Kane weren't playing at the NFL level. 2 were in college, and 1 was a track star. By the way, devastated to hear Devin Allen the other day got disqualified for, a head start in that race by like a fourth of a second. Just unbelievable. But he does have an opportunity to win one of these spots. Reagor should be the best player, but I don't really even know about that. I think special teams ability, the ability to punt return and kick return are going to play a big part in what the Eagles do at these 2 spots. And again, that should be something Reagor is good at, but he wasn't. Last year, he was 3rd, I believe, when it comes to punt return attempts. And he was in the bottom tier when it comes to efficiency, yards per return, and just overall DVOA at that spot. So I really wish a team would take Reagor off the Eagles' hands and give them anything for him. I don't think they're going to just outright cut him because that hurts their cap more than it helps. And it might be good to have a guy like that that's had those kind of snaps and, does have ability. It's why he was a first-round pick as depth. But I think Britton Covey's going to be a better returner. I think Devin Allen might be too. And Deon Cain was turning heads in OTAs as maybe a better receiver right now. Maybe that's a stretch, but it doesn't look good for Reagor. Or Greg Ward, honestly. Like, Greg Ward has been very reliable, and I'll always appreciate what he did for this playoff run in 2019 for the Eagles. But both of those guys, they're not nearly as good returners, I think, as Covey, Allen, and I think Deon Cain might end up turning heads as a better receiver option than those 2. So I would honestly say that I think there's a better chance that Covey, Allen, and or Cain grab 2 of those spots than Reagor and Ward. I don't know. Again, I know some people are kind of hoping that Reagor has that Nelson Aguilar year 3 like trajectory where he's seen as one of the biggest busts in NFL history for a first-round receiver, and then suddenly completely turns it around when there's less expectations on him, less pressure. The team made moves to make sure they don't need Reagor this year. Same with Nelson Aguilar in 2017. They went out there, got Alshon Jeffrey, got Torrey Smith. They already had Jordan Matthews. And then Aguilar forced them to trade Jordan Matthews and became a key part of a championship season in 2017. Don't get your hopes up with Reagor having that kind of trajectory. Aguilar was once in a decade, once in maybe a lifetime kind of situation when it comes to a player having that kind of career trajectory. There's a lot of guys that have had struggles the first few years, especially at receiver, and have come into their own. But listen to this. Of the 12 receivers selected in the first round since 2012, before this past draft, of course, guys that have played already at the NFL level, there's been 12 receivers selected in the first round in the last decade. The guys, or I should say, that's not correct. Excuse me. The 12 receivers selected in the first round since 2012 that finished each of their first 2 seasons under 500 yards, like Nelson Aguilar did, like Jalen Reagor did. Only 1 receiver of those 12 that started their career like that. A first-round pick that only had under 500 yards in his first 2 pro years. Only Aguilar went on to have 1 or multiple seasons of at least 700 yards. Aguilar is the only guy in the last decade to have that kind of trajectory compared to 12 other players that meet that criteria. So Jalen Reagor, to bet on that is an absolute stretch, especially when now he's not only, like, Aguilar was 4th on the depth chart heading into the 2017 season. Zach Pascal and Quez Watkins are in front of Reagor now, with, of course, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Reagor's 5th. That trajectory, don't bet on it. Maybe he's a better player overall than Ward, Covey, Allen, and Cain, but I think Covey's going to be one of the returners. I think he makes this roster. In Reagor versus Ward, Allen, and Cain, I don't know. It's not a guarantee that he gets a roster spot. If they can find a team, I know Baltimore was interested before. If Chicago sees how bad their receivers are and want to take a flyer on another first-round pick like they did N'Keal Harry, maybe they give you a 7th-round pick. Conditional, I don't know. But I would take that and run with it if I can get anything for Reagor this year. So that'll be an interesting battle to watch as well. Coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, there's two more depth battles I want to get into as training camp is right around the corner next Tuesday, starting at NovaCare Complex. But first, one of our sponsors of the day, we want to shout out Dave. Listen, level with me, Eagles fans. We've all been in this situation before at some point in our lives when we're a little tight on cash and maybe you can only afford to put a few gallons of gas in your tank, or you got another save the date, right? And you're wondering how you're going to afford that next gift. That's where Dave can come in and help. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Hindsight is 20/20 and you can't change the past, but what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little bit of cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief that they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the app from the App Store right now. That's Dave, D-A-V-E. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Future you is going to thank you with Dave. All right, Eagles fans, thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We're wrapping up this Monday edition of the show, diving into the training camp battles that are going to start up at NovaCare Complex next Tuesday, July 26th on this Philadelphia Eagles roster. But also, guys, starting today, the Locked On NFL podcast is giving you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most this season? Where does Jalen Reagor end up on that list? I react on the show. Make sure it's available July 28th all throughout the day, all throughout the week. It's free and available on the Locked On NFL podcast on any app. Make sure you download the apps where you get the podcast and subscribe. It's also available in video form on YouTube. So let's get into a couple more depth battles for training camp next week before we do wrap up the show, right? We got into, before the end of segment 2, we got into the 5th and 6th wide receiver spots between Jalen Reagor, Britton Covey, Devin Allen, Deion Kane, Greg Ward. I think that's up for grabs, and a lot of it has to do with return ability. The Eagles have been so bad with punt returning and kick returning over the years. If Britton Covey is a better returner than Jalen Reagor, he might beat him out. Again, I don't know if Reagor's roster spot is guaranteed this year. There's a couple other depth battles here that I want to get into, and another one is on the offensive side of the football. It's that second tight end spot, which is completely wide open now that Dallas Goddard is the featured tight end with Zach Ertz now in Arizona. And the battle is between a lot of unknowns. Grant Calcaterra, the rookie 7th-round pick out of SMU, was also with Oklahoma and Jalen Hurts a few years back. You've got Tyree Jackson coming off that torn ACL, a 6'7 unicorn, switching over from quarterback where he played at the University of Buffalo. Also was on the Bills practice squad for a little bit. You've got J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, one of the biggest busts in Eagles history, a second-round receiver from 2019 that's switching over to tight end to try to save his NFL career and his career with the Eagles. And then you got Jack Stahl, who was the majority tight end 2 last year after the Eagles did trade Ertz because he was the best run blocker of all of these guys. I think Stahl's role is the most cemented this year because of his blocking ability. I think he's the most well-known guy of these 4, considering JJ is switching positions. But I'll tell you what, if Calcaterra or Tyree Jackson can show that Jackson first needs to get healthy coming off the torn ACL. He's currently on the PUP list, but if either one of them can be consistent blockers, they're probably who the Eagles hope will win the job because they are way better receivers than Stoll. I'm rooting for Tyree Jackson personally to be that second tight end. I think he has the highest upside when it comes to an actual receiving threat. Calcaterra, though, might be the safest bet this year because he's got really good hands, smooth separation ability, and, he's been a player that's played this position for a while. So I think the blocking can come maybe more natural to him than Jackson or J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Stoll, again, he's a great blocker, but he definitely has the worst receiving ability of the 4. I would bet right now on Calcaterra being the guy that wins this job in camp. But if Tyree Jackson can stay healthy, again, the Eagles believed in him a lot last year. Like they think highly of Jackson for sure. And I think they want to see him go out and win the job. When it comes to J-Jaw, I don't know. I'm interested to see how that transition goes. But look, he can't separate against corners. And I don't even trust that he showed anything when it comes to being able to separate against safeties and linebackers. And I don't know. I mean, he's not going to be a primary blocker for you. So would he be worth having out there in 12 personnel versus another receiver? Like, if he's not going to block, I don't think he presents a mismatch compared to, Quez Watkins or Zach Pascal. I can't see a situation where they'd want a 2 tight end package with JJ Arcega-Whiteside out there. I don't know. It's not like he's going to be an amazing blocker. He's not a great separator. His hands have not been great at the NFL level. I know Gino probably thinks differently of him, and he loves JJ's ability to be a primary special teams player, but I just can't see a scenario where he makes this roster over Calcaterra, Jackson, or Stoll, and he's featured on this offense. I just can't see it. I know there's been other receivers that have transitioned over to tight end or other positions, like Logan Thomas, but I bet on Tyree Jackson figuring it out, going from quarterback to tight end more than JJ. I think the JJ experiment should be over, and I'm not rooting for him to make the roster this year, for sure. There's one other depth battle I want to get into before we wrap up this edition of Locked On Eagles, and it's the battle of all the young guns at the cornerback position. Again, corner is locked when it comes to the starting trio. It's James Bradberry, it's Darius Slay, and it's Avonte Maddox. Zach McPherson, I think, heads into training camp as the favorite to win that primary backup boundary cornerback spot, right? If Darius Slay goes down or Bradberry, I could see them maybe moving Maddox on the outside, but we've seen that experiment before, and I prefer to keep Maddox in the slot where he played at a very high level in 2021. I think if there was an injury to Slay or Bradberry, McPherson is your guy, former 4th-round pick in 2021. Showed some okay things last year when he had to play. Never got burned like Michael Jaquette. That's a good sign to start. But I really like K'Von Jr. too. I think he may be the most promising of the other young flyers, just based on his length, his fluid hip changing ability. I think his speed overall. There's a reason that they wanted him as part of that Zach Ertz trade. The Eagles actually wanted to draft K'Von a few years ago. So they've liked him even throughout that draft process. I think he's the favorite over Kerry Vincent Jr., the other undrafted kids this year coming out of Alabama, Josh Jobe, Mario Goodrich coming out of Clemson. I like Jobe and Goodrich, and they're versatile, maybe even can play the safety position. And I think they definitely can make the roster. A couple of these guys could. But I think when it comes to like winning a primary spot, that if there was an injury, these guys are going to play. I think right now you should bet on Zach McPherson and K'Von Jr. Got a bunch of battles starting up next Tuesday. Can't wait to follow along and see how they're going down at the NovaCare Complex. We'll get you covered all throughout the week and follow training camp all throughout the summer. Right here on Locked On Eagles, make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get the podcast, free and available Monday through Friday, also in video form as well on YouTube. I'm writing articles for our sister station, Fox 43, and make sure you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Birds, at DiBiase LOE. That's going to do it, though, for today's edition of the show. Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL podcast, all the news across the league in under 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your Locked On Eagles as well. As always, thank you for downloading, thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.